Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The Lakers are looking for their 10th win, and they're talking about roles. Maybe a new one for Dalton Knecht and a new one for D'Angelo Russell as well. That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everyone for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday. No matter how or where you get your podcasts, this one's always free and never behind paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where over 26,000 subscribers are all relishing the idea of the Lakers being currently the third seed, Andy. They wake up as the third seed in the very early portion of the season in the West, which, look, I know, what are we, a little more than an eighth of the way through? I think most fans wouldn't have pictured the Lakers being where they are after, eventually 15 games. Tonight being the 15th against the Utah Jazz at home. Do want to let people know.
Be the 14th. 14th.
No, tonight's the 15th one. They're 10 and they're 9 and 4. I think we have established over the last week that this is not the show you go to for math. So there was an interesting day in El Segundo Monday. You were there, Andy. A lot of talk of roles, potentially, what Dalton Knecht has been doing, and certainly at least on the Lakers-related social media boards, plenty of talk as to whether or not Dalton Knecht should actually stay in the starting lineup, which we will get to. And then obviously the new role that D'Angelo Russell has played off the bench and how he is adjusting to it, or even, Andy, according to JJ Redick, if it's a new role at all. So we'll get to all that in a second. I thought part of the conversation was interesting and revealing at least about Redick, if nothing else. So, let's though.
It's not so much revealing. We'll get into it as confirming, because it confirms what I've been saying about him since basically he first started talking to the assembled media as coach of the Lakers.
So we'll get to that in a second after we get to the housekeeping. The Lakers, part of the reason Dalton Knecht has been in the starting lineup has been an injury to Cam Reddish. Reddish is practiced on Monday and presumably be available for Tuesday's game, presumably, but not necessarily. Has a better chance of being in the lineup at the very least than Rui Hachimura, who didn't practice on Monday and is listed as questionable. So presumably Reddish is feeling better, and that gets to this question, Andy, of whether or not Dalton Knecht ought to remain in the starting lineup, even if Reddish is available. And I think it is kind of a fascinating question that gets to me, at least, gets a little bit of the heart of like, what are NBA rotations for?
It's an interesting question with Knecht. Obviously, he has been really good since entering the starting lineup, pressing the duty with these different injuries. He is, according to the recent splits I look at, hopefully that they are up to date, as a starter averaging 15 points a game, 49% from the field, 38% from behind the arc, little under 5 rebounds and a steal. So that is very, very good work. I imagine over the last 2 games, that number would be even higher.
Yes, he is shooting over in his last 4 games. Since he went 0 for 5 against the Sixers in that 116-106 win over Philadelphia, he was 1 of 8 from the floor and 0 of 5 from three-point range. The game before that against Memphis, he was 1 of 7 from the floor in 27 minutes and 1 of 7 from three-point range. Since that Philly game, though, he is shooting over 50% from three-point range and over 50%, well over 50% from the floor. So his percentages over the last 4 games have been phenomenal, and obviously coming off the 27-point effort against New Orleans. So, it's not surprising fans look at that and be like, why don't we just keep that there? Even if it represents sort of the high watermark of what you would expect Knecht to be able to produce on a nightly basis.
I mean, the most important thing before we even get into the question, like the deep dive into whether or not he should remain starting or go back to the bench, is that this version of Dalton Knecht that we're seeing, and I don't mean necessarily the guy who puts up 27 and 7, but the guy that looks like a legit NBA scorer, I think that is absolutely real. Like, I think that is who Dalton Knecht is. I think this is a version of Dalton Knecht, whether what we saw on Saturday was the highest end or, a notch or two below would be the lowest end. He is somebody that clearly belongs on an NBA floor. He is capable of playing real minutes for a team with aspirations. Mm-hmm. And that is the most important thing than whether he starts, whether he comes off the bench. Like JJ Redick talked about, this was in the context of D'Angelo Russell's role, which we'll get into later, but how he's seeking out balance in terms of the lineups that he has on the floor, balance in skill sets, balance in offense, balance in defense. And that's going to play very clearly as big of a role in, dictating these decisions for Redick as just Knecht's production. But it's very clear this guy belongs in the rotation and he ain't going anywhere anytime soon.
Well, I mean, we talked about this for Monday's show. It's very clear he has a skill set that is very different than anything really the Lakers have had in recent memory, kind of, if ever. It is amazing. I was looking, we talked a lot about like, what's the right comp? And for me, it's not even just like a guy who can shoot. You mentioned Nick Young or players like that, and I understood what you were getting at, but I think for his, specific skill set of this like high volume 3-point gunner, it's more of a, I think you start with the 3-point shooters and then expand that outwards to guys who are Buddy Hield, but have more of a little more versatility to their offensive game. And
well, for me, it was really specifically not even purely the variance to his offensive game, but it was the athleticism. Like the athleticism is what really, like even a guy like Clay, who, we came up and I want to make it clear because a couple of people took umbrage in the comment sections. We very much spelled out, we are not declaring Dalton Knecht the next coming of Klay Thompson, certainly not on the basis of like 5 games, but just in case it needs to be said again, he's not yet the second coming of Klay Thompson, but there's an athleticism even that Dalton Knecht has shown now that I don't think was necessarily there.
Prime Clay was a pretty good. He was
a very good athlete, but he wasn't the type of vertical athlete that we've seen from.
No, but he was a different kind of athlete.
I know, but I'm talking about a very specific. I'm talking about
fine, but I don't. And that's my point. But
but in terms of breaking down who he is and what type of player, I do think it actually matters. I think that force of gravity that he can have getting towards the rim and even above it, I think that matters.
It matters, but it matters, and I'll explain why it matters more in the context of what I'm talking about. Plus, what I think, like how I think Redick looks at this question of a starting lineup, and it'll lead us into the D'Angelo Russell conversation next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. PrizePicks is the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you got to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, then just watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. Items like Luka Doncic with more or less than 31.5 points, Steph Curry, more or less than 4 3-pointers. Anthony Davis, more or less than 11 rebounds. Giannis, more or less than 29.5 points down the line. PrizePicks, the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with injury insurance policy. So your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured, and you can collect your winnings in up to 15 minutes. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA and get $50 instantly when you play just $5. That's the code LOCKEDONNBA on PrizePicks, and you get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even have to win to get the $50 bonus. Like, it's guaranteed. That is some easy bonus money. PrizePicks, run your game.
Okay, so not to get too deep into the argument, we can always carry it on another time. But what I think matters about this is why I think, I'm looking at it the other direction. The stuff about being able to get vertical above the rim, being able to run out on the break, all that is valuable. The foundation of what Knecht provides in offense, though, the root of it is actually, it's the same as Steph. It's the shooting. The shooting is the basis for all of it. That Steph can do 800 other things is what makes him one of the greatest players that ever lived. Again, the disclaimer goes up in bright. Please tap the sign. We're not calling him Steph Curry either. But Steph's ability to get to the rim, Steph's ability to, all of those things that he does, distribute this and that, is all based fundamentally on the threat that he provides as a shooter. If Knecht couldn't shoot in the same way, his value as a vertical player above the rim, on the break, all that stuff goes down. He provides something that the Lakers just don't ever have, which is the guy who you want, in one day, if he's playing 32, 33, 34 minutes a game, the guy that you want shooting 9 or 10 3-pointers a game, where that, your offense is constructed around somebody who does that and must be taken seriously. It gets to, and so the idea of whether or not he should start, in my brain, my default of what is an NBA rotation for, what is a lineup for, at its core, to me, it's how can you maximize the amount of time that your best players play? That's sort of fundamentally it. And then from there, you have to start doing what I think JJ Redick is doing, which is adding context to that. Well, you can't always play your best players together because sometimes they're clustered into the same positions and you can't play 4 guards at once. Okay. Now what, so you have to make separations based on that. Sometimes you need a particular skill set, and best in this case means the guy who can do something way better than everybody else that we really need. That could be Knecht shooting. And then in other times, it's contextually 2 of our best players just can't play together very well because their weaknesses overlap too much. And that's
D'Lo and Reeves.
Correct. That's why D'Lo's not starting. And how you organize those things is interesting. Is Dalton Knecht one of their 5 best players? Maybe 5th, 6th, 7th, something like that. But now he's somewhere in that mix to the point of how are we defining best and then getting to those combinations. If he can stay in it defensively, I got no problem with them finding a way to get him starters minutes at all.
Well, the starters minutes piece of it, I think, is going to end up eventually happening one way or another, where he will be, if nothing else, if not fifth highest or higher minute total per game, it's going to be comparable. He's going to be in that mix. I feel like that's just basically going to be happening pretty inevitably, just because I think he's going to be climbing up sort of the hierarchy of the guys in the rotation. As far as the piece of starting him, I think the problem isn't even so much Dalton himself and the weaknesses that he has, although the biggest one being defense does matter when you start thinking about the balance that Redick has talked about looking for. If you play Redick and if you play Reeves and Knecht together as backcourt, you at that point have to put, I think, either Christie or Reddish as the small forward, because I think if you put Rui back into that slot, even though I think Rui is a better defender than Dalton Knecht, Rui is not a good enough defender to give you optionality with the issues that come definitely with Knecht and to some degree Reeves, especially if you don't have a plus defender out there.
Basically replicating the same problems that you have with D'Lo,
right?
With a guy
exactly
with a little more length and shooting.
I think at that point you become forced, at least until Jared Vanderbilt is back, you become forced to, out of necessity, start Christie or Reddish. I would vote for Christie, but regardless of which one you pick, I think you are still then left with the problem of both Knecht and Christie being undersized for certain matchups. Like your 1 through 3 is pretty small. Like even noting that LeBron and AD are pretty big 4-5, your 1 through 3 at that point becomes smaller. I think it becomes tricky to do this. And were I to bet on this now, and it's purely speculative, I have done no poking around about it. I'm just trying to think about this based on the way I've seen Redick balance a lot of this. I am guessing with a fuller complement of players, he's going to move Knecht back to the bench. He's going to be looking for more of that balanced defensive integrity with either Christie or Reddish at one slot, and then Rui, when he's eventually back, as another slot for more size and also a little more optionality in terms of where you have to assign LeBron defensively. But either way, what is going to happen is you're going to see Dalton Knecht's minutes, I think, go up a lot. And depending on how he's playing in different games, like we saw recently, he could end up closing games. I think that could end up an option as well. And by the way, that's a hell of a lot of trust to put in a rookie with 15 games under his belt, 14 games under his belt, depending on, where we are in the season when Reddish / Rui / hopefully Vando sometime this century return.
There's a pretty good amount of space between like 12 minutes a night for Knecht, which is, closer to where he has been on those nights where he hasn't played as much, and the 37 he played against New Orleans as a starter with 2 guys out and, D'Lo in foul trouble in the first half. Like there's a lot of space in between those 2 numbers. And I, to some degree, some of this is related to me to the everlasting gobstopper question of how long, like, what do we think of Cam Reddish? And by we mean the coaching staff. I mean the coaching staff. Like he definitely, like last year, he came in and he sort of solved a problem briefly, and then he didn't anymore. And I don't think it was really his fault, but like it just, kind of wore off. With that lineup switch, they kind of solved a problem, and they did it not necessarily because Reddish himself is fantastic, but what he did provide, came in, played hard, and brought a very different skill set, obviously, than D'Angelo Russell. I wonder how permanent the effect of that is going to be, because I just don't think Reddish is a high enough level player to be a starter on a really, really good team. I just don't. I think if you need him to fill a gap, it indicates that you have a roster problem in other ways. It's less about him, it's more about your roster. So can they figure out a way to solve some of that? If the answer is yes, then I think Reddish, his time in the starting lineup or his time as a high minutes player will end faster. Because again, I just don't, so I really wonder what the coaching staff thinks about Reddish as a long-term option in the starting lineup, whether they see that as a stopgap to try to get something kind of on track and change the composition of the rotation, or if they really think that he is the 5th guy to put in there to make this whole thing work.
I think we'll really start getting answers to that when we see both him and Christie healthy at the same time and see how the minutes get allotted.
Yeah, and we'll get some of that because Christie himself actually had a little bit of a bounce back over the weekend as well. Yeah. So, we are hopefully getting back to a place where Redick has more players at his disposal that are playable than not. And so that's a really good thing. The other guy whose role is definitely has changed and does not seem to be going back to the old way anytime soon is D'Angelo Russell. Lots of discussion from Russell and Redick alike about his time on the bench and what that looks like and what that has meant next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by FanDuel. You can tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5, just $5 on Abe Lincoln bill, and you get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So just pick a really obvious $5 bet, and then boom, $150 in bonus bets. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So let's just say also, and this is a great feature of FanDuel. Like, let's just say in the middle of a game, you are just feeling hunches because it's just like, I have been anticipating everything that's going to happen in this game. Every big touchdown run, every momentum shift, a big game-changing sack, whatever. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And again, you get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
So, Andy, you were a theater major. I was a theater minor. Certainly both of us are familiar with the expression that there are no small roles, there are only small actors. I felt like Monday's conversation at practice was kind of a distillation of that from a basketball standpoint. Andy, what is a role anyway when we're talking about basketball?
This was an interesting section of practice. I don't remember exactly how it came up, but JJ Redick ended up fielding a fair amount of questions about D'Angelo Russell, this move to the bench, how he has been dealing with it, adjusting to it, whatever. Here's how he initially just described this process for D'Lo.
After the last road trip, you guys made a pretty big move in moving D'Lo to the bench. How is, now that we have some sample, not a big one, but some, how has he handled it? What have you liked about him with the second unit?
He's handled it great. I think the challenge is always going to be for us as coaches to try to make sure that he gets to be D'Lo, and that's not an overnight process. That's a longer process. And, his engagement has been wonderful, just in terms of being with the team, but also his engagement defensively has really picked up the last 5 games.
And I guess over the course of Redick being asked these questions about D'Lo, he heard the word role one too many times, R-O-L-E. He just had heard role come up too often in talking about what D'Angelo Russell is playing for this team and some type of role shift, because it led to this exchange between me and JJ Redick when I was asking him specifically about D'Lo. You talked a lot heading into the season about just having a lot of communication with different players about roles, stuff like that. Was the idea of D'Lo coming off the bench something that you talked about him with before the season even began, just like this could be a possibility so he'd be prepared for it?
Yeah, I think you guys are looking at the role of a starter and a bench player as like what a role is. That's not a role on a team. That's literally what somebody announces before the game. That's not a role.
Well, but I mean, but players sometimes see it differently.
D'Lo, I don't think D'Lo saw that differently. D'Lo and I talked prior to making the decision. He doesn't view it differently. I don't think, I certainly don't view it differently. The role is not who starts and who comes off the bench. The role is how you play on the court. And there's not a role change for him. It's an adjustment for the team.
Okay. In the most literal sense, I guess if you are trying to define this dictionary perfect, I guess Redick's explanation here is technically accurate. In the real world of how the NBA works, his explanation is flat out BS. It's semantic-y horse bleep. I mean,
okay.
As I said to him,
I'll take up for JJ here.
Go on.
I get why he's framing it this way.
I get why he's doing it, and so it's clear, just so people understand. I don't give a rat's ass if JJ Redick is not being fully transparent with me. I don't expect him to be.
It's
like,
not
I don't
even,
think he needs
it's not
to
so much transparent. I'm not sure that's the word I would use. I think I get, okay. So he's doing it, I think, for a couple of reasons. First of all, he doesn't want it to be like, yeah, his role's changed. It's like, but also, he doesn't want to de-emphasize D'Lo's importance on the team and so on and so on. There's some politics in play here.
He doesn't have to, honestly. Like, but you could say his role has changed without it becoming less important.
Right. But this is what I'm going to get to in a second. From a basketball standpoint, as a coach, I think what he's trying to communicate is valuable. What we are asking people to do in terms of how they play is your role. What you do on the floor is your role. The job we are asking you to execute as a player on the floor is your role. In that sense, I actually think I would argue that he's, he kind of tried to slide in an adjustment in there. Like, are we talking like, what's the difference between an adjustment and a role?
Again,
okay.
I've said this before. JJ Redick loves him some semantics.
He does. Right.
And this is his move.
Right.
This is his move.
100%. And so, I actually do think D'Lo's had to, how he plays on the floor actually has changed too. And they are only now, the first couple games, I described it as like play acting, where Russell was like trying to be like second unit guy getting out and scoring. And it didn't look terribly comfortable because it wasn't, the passing wasn't there, whatever. The second half of the New Orleans game when he wasn't in foul trouble, the Friday night's game in San Antonio, those look more like D'Angelo Russell doing D'Lo stuff just as a bench role. Where I think your part of the question was spot on was, okay, in your definition, it's not a role change because you're defining it as X's and O's, how we use you on the floor. At the very least, it's a status change. And if you don't think that NBA players pay very close attention to status, then I do not. I mean, if Redick tried to claim that as a guy who played how many years in the league,
16 or something,
I would call BS on that.
Well, I mean, I imagine JJ Redick at the time cared about whether or not he started. I mean, you and I covered Lamar Odom. Lamar Odom may be the most selfless teammate I have ever encountered for any team in any sport.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you will never find a guy who puts the team ahead of himself, sometimes in ways that teammates would be and coaches would be like, dude, be more selfish. Like, we are begging you, be more selfish. Lamar Odom was upset about being moved to the bench. That is one reason I know that Redick is, frankly, just lying about this. But also hearing D'Angelo Russell talk about this. First, this was D'Lo being asked just about, what it's taken for him to do this.
We were just talking to JJ a little bit about how the coaching staff, he said the coaching staff needs to do a better job of finding ways for you to be D'Lo more within kind of their system, I guess. What's that process been like between you trying to play the way that your coaches want versus the ways that you've always played? What's sort of the growth, I guess, on that?
Just a lot of sacrifice. Simple as that.
Have you been satisfied with the results?
Yeah, we're winning.
So then I asked D'Lo the following.
You said earlier in answering a question about adjustments and stuff that a certain amount of sacrifice is required. What specifically is being sacrificed?
Just sacrifice. However you use that word, I think it can broad and it can go a lot of ways, but however you decide to use sacrifice, that's what I mean.
So basically, I'm going to leave this up to you, dear viewer, dear listener, dear anybody paying attention to the Lakers. You can define sacrifice any way you damn well feel. I just want to make sure you are aware that however you're defining it, I'm doing it. Like, and it's also
right.
It's what's ironic with all this. And again, I want to make it clear, I have zero issues with D'Lo thinking of it as a sacrifice at all. I don't
sacrifice if nothing else, it's a sacrifice of status.
Right.
And
right. I mean,
going from starter to bench player, going from 35 minutes to 23 minutes, going, This stuff impacts how you're viewed around the league. It impacts how much money you make. It impacts everything. So,
Right.
yeah.
And I don't think it reflects poorly on D'Lo at all.
Sure doesn't.
If he considers it a sacrifice, I don't think it reflects
Right.
poorly on
None of
D'Lo.
this, by the way, should keep Redick from putting him on the bench.
No. But this could also just be D'Lo's way of making himself feel better about it because he knows there's like a nobility to it. Like whatever it takes. What's interesting about it is I looked at D'Lo's splits since moving to the bench, and per 36 minutes, he's actually getting more field goal attempts, and he's taking almost as many shots per game coming off the bench as he is starting, even with the minute he was starting, even with the minutes discrepancy. But the ball is in his hands more. He has more control during this period where he's making, in his mind, and I think rightly, a sacrifice of sorts. And what's fascinating about all this, at least to me, is I think D'Lo has bought into this to the degree of, I get why I'm doing it. I will do it and buy into it while we are winning. That he clearly is not wild about it, I think is fine. I don't honestly care. I mean, to some degree, that's what the money's for. But like, he doesn't have to like it. He just has to do what's asked of him with both arms wrapped around it. As long as he does, it says nothing bad about him if he doesn't like it. It's fine.
It gets back to what I was saying before about like what the purpose of the lineup is, what the purpose of a rotation is, and why you sometimes have to go away from a purely are my 5 best players playing the most minutes that they possibly can. The other thing that was going on with D'Lo, it wasn't just a defensive thing. The way that Redick wants his offense to operate, it took the ball out of D'Lo's hands a lot more. Mm-hmm. And it just makes him less effective. It makes him less useful. If you are going to maximize his skill set in a situation where he's got the ball in his hands more. I mean, as poorly as he was shooting, even before they made the lineup change, his metrics, his net rating and all that kind of stuff up near the highest on the team among players who were in the rotation. Like, his net rating was very good when it was moved. Yeah. He was doing point guardy stuff really well. He just, the shooting wasn't there and they didn't like the defensive combinations. His metrics coming off the bench are still really, really good. But this isn't new. It's not like it's not like he was hurting them statistically before and is now helping them statistically after. It's just rearranged where his contributions have gone. And does D'Angelo Russell think of this as a role change? I suspect he does, because, basketball players see starter versus as a different role. When Russell Westbrook went to the bench, literally played exactly the same way, allocated at different times in the game. He talked about it as a role. Everybody talked about it as a role change. Yeah. Because it was happening at a different time. It's part of the role. But this, even if he's willing to accept that he's playing technically the same role, it's the sacrifice that matters, not the role change. And for anybody to say that going from he's basically been a starter 85% of his NBA career,
other than with Byron, he pretty much always.
And there was a somewhere in there, I think he came off the bench a little bit, but I forget, for like 85 or 90% of his career, he's been a starter.
Yeah.
And he is not anymore. That is in the mind of an NBA player, especially one that, could be a free agent again at the end of the year, that is a big change and a big sacrifice. So, I think that Redick is handling it well, trying to not make it seem like he has to do different basketball things and pointing to like, look, we're helping D'Lo beat D'Lo.
I mean, in some ways, the different stuff he's being asked to do plays to his strengths more. Like that is a role change for the better.
Not trying to make it seem like he is less valuable because a starter is more valuable than a reserve in the minds of at the very least sort of casuals. Mm-hmm. D'Lo is handling it right by saying, I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to do what I'm asked to do. And everybody is working their way through this process. But it is, where they land on Knecht, where they land on D'Lo, all these things reveal a lot about what exactly it is that Redick is trying to accomplish as head coach. Plenty to discuss after tonight's game that will hopefully run the Lakers record to 10-4, as I forecasted at the top of the show. We will bring all of the analysis to you after the game and stick on this topic of starters and bench guys and all that stuff over the course of the week. Locked On Lakers on YouTube, or go hang out with over 26,000 subscribers. See everyone after the game.